So after doing Wilson's Creek and Pea Ridge, I got a couple more of these great battles of the American Civil War games. Mainly, entirely actually, picked up relatively recently. I finally managed to get Cedar Mountain, which was the magazine issue that I missed. It was kind of in between my two subscriptions, and I didn't know whether I was going to get it or not. And then when it didn't come, I didn't have an opportunity after that to pick it up. Felt very badly about it. Felt kind of boned about picking it up because buying the magazines new from a store, even if I had done it, and I didn't end up at like the Complete Strategist, the closest place to me that had it, which would have been an hour and a half or more time-wise, more like 2 hours taking the bus into New York City, and I almost never went to New York City. So I had one kind of opportunity about the same time it was there, saw it, and said, oh no, I think I'm going to get that, or maybe I stopped by SPI itself, and it may have been on my visit there, although I think that was at an earlier point. Anyway, I only had one opportunity. There was no store near me, no store near where my dad worked, which would have been a 45-minute drive, but reasonable, that I could get SPI stuff of any kind. It took many years until I was in college where I started seeing them show up at KB Toy and Hobby or something. And there, I've never seen Wilson's Creek. Anyway, I managed to pick it up recently on eBay, but this is Pleasant Hill. Now, this one came out in an S&T after TSR took over the company, and oh boy, you can tell the production quality has just gone downhill. First of all, the map coloring, I can live with this. This browns instead of the greens. It's more distinctive. I think it's kind of hideous, but okay. The kind of plain looking, it's like there's less details. It looks like somebody's 5-year-old drew this map, to tell you the truth. The counter art has stayed about the same, but the counter quality has declined tremendously. First of all, glossy with no advantage. None of the full color glossies that you see today, or that even Avalon Hill started pioneering in the early 90s. You're seeing the kind of crap work that TSR specialized in, but also things like West End tended to have these kind of counters. Side mounted, so every single damn one of them has a little nub, and you can't clip it. I know some people talk about using a sharp scissors. Well, I use a sharp scissors for all my clipping. I've tried razors, etc. Anything you do ends up dishing the counters and turning them into weird shapes. It's just, side-mounted counters are bad, but these are really, really resilient to having their little tabs removed. There's a counter that's misprinted, but we saw in Wilson's Creek, we saw that. That's this one. I've turned this, it's not supposed to be a cav, into an infantry, but not before I screwed up and wrote the infantry unit on the back that would have gone with the mounted unit. Hey, whatever. This is not something I'm going to play many times. Comes with a order of battle with the brigade combat effectiveness, but one thing you'll notice, everything's all torn apart. It's because, unlike in the SPI days, S&Ts stopped being properly inserted in the middle of the magazine. So quite often you'll see this where somebody had to rip out pages. You've got like excess article information here, so you couldn't just take the game out the way you used to. They really didn't have a feel for how their customers used their product, or the product that they ended up purchasing. Really not looking forward to... Here's a rant with nothing about the game, right? Well, such is life. I'm really not looking forward to coping with my Wellington's victory. I wish I could have gotten the old SPI version, but I think I haven't clipped the counters yet, and that's going to be a nightmare to deal with. Thank God my terrible Swift Sword is the original version. Anyway, beyond these issues, what do we got here? We have, yet again, Great Battles of the American Civil War, with lots of tweaking going on to these rules. You know, like the core systems are again being changed a little bit because one designer doesn't like what the decision is. And this is really one of the flaws with the system to me, is there's no system. Every game you play has its own special rules that aren't just battle oriented, but have to do with some of the key core rules that, you know, if you pick up a gamer's Civil War Brigade series, very seldomly will change. Let's see, we have our range. So one of the interesting things about this system, and this is one of the things that changes, they keep changing the scale to fit the battle on one map or whatever they want to do. Usually the scale of the size of the counters stays the same, but the size represented by the hexes changes. But you also have a lot of different kind of weapons in this. I think Pea Ridge had more, but that's something we're beginning to see is more, every one of them has, yeah, Pea Ridge definitely had more different types of artillery. And with the different numbers, you know, the old TSS system had a fairly easy way of looking at and saying, yeah, those are smoothbore naps and those are rifled artillery, and that's enough. We got a couple more. We got your Whitworths and maybe a couple of other weird little pieces. But for the most part, you didn't have many different types. Well, this system, and for good or ill, I think I would have liked it more earlier, divides up a lot more different types. So it's harder to remember the modifiers. Some of the numbers don't work as well. You know, you got to multiply by 9. What the hell? Yeah, I mean, they're just not as easy to grasp. But you're getting more detail and more realism. At least, you know, the designer's able to express more with all these different types of guns. It just means more lookups, though, and I don't know how much it really helps things. All right. So, again, special rules to change things. Well, what have they changed? They've changed leadership, but this is battle-specific, which is you can't go rallying things that aren't in your command. In this case, in this particular battle, and I put a video up giving some description, I don't know. I don't have much background information on this battle, much detail about how the battle went. I have some about the Red River campaign. Basically, the Union is marching up toward Shreveport, and the Confederates have been falling back. Porter's navy is gunboats running along the Red River are getting blocked by really marvels of Confederate defensive engineering, you know, dams being used to siphon the water off the river, etc. So that it was really painful and he couldn't keep going. So they lose the naval support they expected to have heading up this way. You have an incompetent U.S. general, or Union general, in Banks, who doesn't even have a counter on the board. For the Confederates, let's see if you have him on here. No, don't look like we have him either. You have a much more competent Taylor, who actually kind of showed himself as fairly effective here. Banks ended up, the day before this battle, having his supply wagons blocking his rear guard units. Much of his army couldn't come up. A battle was fought. It was a resounding Confederate victory. The Union pulls back into this area of Pleasant Hill, and the Confederates march forward and make another attack. This time, I believe this is an evening attack, starting at 4:20 and going into the night. Of course, they didn't decide to give... Yeah, they did. I'm kind of glad they don't give military time, but it would be nice to have the AM, PM on the map. Just to indicate that. But my understanding is this was an evening battle. It seems to go quite late, actually, but we're talking high summer here, I think. Again, they don't put the date right there, so you don't get a lot of information. We can get it down here, can't we? Nah, you know, they're not that there we go. 9th of April, 1864. That's not exactly... high summer. All right. Well, anyway. So it's probably fairly dark by the end of that. Let's look at some of these. again. There's no attachment or detachment. No seeing the elephant, no biggie there. Thus, you don't even have to state that. You have to like specifically invoke that. Cav brigades are independent, no biggie there. Batteries are independent, no biggie there. Bagbies and Majors brigades are independent, no biggie there. Stacking restrictions again. The system doesn't really cover that usually. Usually that's you find it over here somewhere on the terrain effects chart or somewhere else. And I'm not actually seeing it. Here we go, stacking restrictions. Yeah, that's a pretty standard commodity for this situation, and the numbers look about the same. 3 counters, 10 strength points, that's a little low. 3 counters, 8 strength points in the woods, that's a lot of counters. But okay. And otherwise it looks like it's all pretty common. They've added some sharpshooters, which give a Confederate sharpshooters actually, which gives a slight advantage. That's no big deal. Yeah, that's just part of the regular rules being restated in a different way. Okay, artillery. The smoothbore artillery, which is the N's, L's, and HAs, are allowed to fire canister at a higher rate. They can fire 2, and this is the kind of tweaking we're talking about. This should be across the system. Why is it only in this game? You'd think that the designer of the original system would have said, yeah, this is a general rule. But now somebody's standing in and tweaking and saying, oh, no, that's not actually taking advantage of the fact that this was happening. And that's the kind of disturbing thing to me. But anyway, they're able to get an advantage by firing grape shot at close range where it's really canister. It's not balls. Sometimes you're firing balls and calling it grape shot in this game. It's just a weirdness. And you get a little bonus. This uses a crew marker system, kind of like Pea Ridge did, but cleverly they listened to my advice and gave abandoned gun markers so that I don't have to use something else for that. Probably not enough to cover everything. In this game, they actually allow recrewing, which is denied in all the others, under certain specific circumstances. And again, I think this is a move towards realism. However, you're tweaking with the base system. It means that people who played this can't just read a little short bit of rules. It's 4 pages, and many of them are changes and rewriting. Some of them for good reasons, some of them not so much. Counter battery fire, again, new rules for how artillery fire at each other. Why? Because the designer didn't like the system. Well, he shouldn't be designing for the system then. Prolonged movement. Yeah. Okay, remember one of the rules from TSS, prolong, was dropped from the system, too annoying. Added as a specific rule to this battle for no apparent real reason. I don't think it had a humongous effect on this battle in comparison to any other. However, they don't just retire by prolong, they allow advancing by prolong as well, where you can fire and move a hex at the same time. Now, you can effectively do that under the rules in the system as it stood, because you could unlimber, or you could limber a gun, move it 1 hex, and unlimber it in most cases. I don't know if the movement rates work in this one. They may have had to put it in place to make up for that. But the one thing that it does change is it means you get to fire at the artillery. If it slides right next to you doing this, you get to shoot at the artillery in limbered state, which is an advantage. That's gone now. There's no advantage for these guys who are trying to drag the gun forward and firing in between. It kind of makes sense, but I don't know how much you'd have artillery pulling itself that close. All right. Special rules on independent units, which is no biggie. That's just specific. Terrain. We've got different elevations in this. I don't know how much some of the others had that, and they're not going to have that much effect, and they're pretty simple. The same normal terrain system works. Woods are thicker forests. There's historical sites, no biggie there. There's a gully here, which the Union is kind of in. That gives a more significant defensive bonus. None of the rivers have bridges crossing the water. They had to specify that because the map is so childishly and poorly drawn. The whole, art department must have left during this time because this just does not look like an SBI map. Terrain and column shifts. This is part of the general rules to the system. It's been kind of specified in here as part of the particulars for this game. Just that, hey, you take terrain effects no matter how many hexes you're firing from. So, like, if I'm attacking you across the stream and other units are not across the stream and there's a penalty for crossing the stream, which there would be for melee, everybody who's attacking through in that hex suffers from it. Hey, no biggie, that's kind of obvious. That was part of the original system. I think they just clarified it, but why clarify it in the general rules or in the specific rules for the scenario? They should have put out a new version of this if they thought that clarification needed to be put there. Not in every specific. Route and retreat, this has to be done for the system. And they give some specific rules here. One of the problems is I think this is more or less how I've been playing it, and I think it's kind of how the TSS system goes. So again, it's correcting the basic rules a little bit, where you're allowed to retreat through an enemy zone of control, but you take fire. Yeah, that's not a big deal. But they quote it as withdrawal fire. It used to be retreat fire that they took from those, so I don't know. I think we've still got the same standard rules. So I think what we've got is somebody who designed this who's not really familiar with the system. And you can see it's all torn apart. Yeah, retreating into a zone of control causes fire. I really get the feeling somebody who did not understand the system rules wrote the rules to this, overwrote some of them that he didn't like or didn't understand that they were already covered. Okay, but there are specifics for Confederate retreats and Union retreats, and that's just direction, which it belongs. Command structure, they had to rewrite this for this game. So you have wing nuts in this, or wings. One thing is, these units really do not cooperate. So different divisions will not cooperate with each other. They can't stack, they can't fire together, etc. That's kind of like in Wilson's Creek between McCulloch and Pike. I don't know what these corps commanders do. They can command a single brigade, or a combat unit, or rally a unit automatically at a cost of a command point. And now these guys, it's kind of weird because these guys have a range and a command points, but this guy doesn't seem to have a range, and I don't know. I don't think this is a counter failure in terms of the printing, although I wouldn't put that past them. The TSR ones definitely had problems. Artillery supply, this is following the P Ridge type of artillery supply, where somewhere or another the supply wagon has small arms and artillery separate. Brigade combat effectiveness is going to be used in this. Now, they changed the rules for brigade combat effectiveness a little bit, but remember, that's not specified in the system for whatever reason. It's not much different. I'm trying to see how they changed it. They added... it's harder to rally units that have lost BCE in this particular game. And I think that's a nice addition again. I think overall, a lot of the additions that were put in this one are good, more detail, but they feel like they should have been part of the general system. Setup for this is a little different from some of the other games. Here you've got the actual hexes that you're setting up on the back routed side of the counter. That's actually kind of nice. That's throwing back to the old S&T days. Of course, both Pea Ridge and Wilson's Creek. Well, not so much Wilson's Creek. There's a lot of Confederates on the map that you had to look in the rules to find where to set them up. It's kind of nice having it on the counters themselves. I actually found it took me more time, though, to set them up by the counter because they tended not to be spatially located. So normally I would sort the counters. I'm sure it would work fine if I sorted the counters first and then set them up. That's just a suggestion, actually, because for me, I think it would have been quicker that way. I just didn't want to touch these things too much. Anything else here? Okay, first turn restrictions. The Confederates are limited to what they can move. They got a few units. Churchill's Wing, which is Tappan's and Parsons' division. That's down here somewhere. That's this whole line here. The Union can't do defensive fire during the first Confederate player turn, and they can't move during the Union player turn of turn 1 except for routes. Okay, and sort of mixed in with that is this concept which doesn't seem to... It seems like they're covering the same ground here. It's reserve units and activation. Most of the units in the game are in reserve. For the Confederates, it's everything except that's listed in 29.1. Now, 29.1 is how to set up, which doesn't say a damn thing about this, except it talks about all units, and it talks about the Confederate batteries. I think it's going to be the ones not in the special first turn restrictions. So only some Confederate units are allowed to move in the first turn. Game turn 2 and after, everything except those in 30.12, which is going to be a few reserve units. Polignac, Pelican, Cornay, and the Louisiana Cavalry. Where's Polignac? I bet you that's this stuff down here. Yeah. Is held in reserve. Now, the entire Union Army is in reserve. And they're kind of restricted and can't move for several turns. And we have like these letters here which indicate what can be released at what time. There's some effect of units getting close. So if Confederate units get close to Union units, if they get within 3 hexes, they wake them up. But if they are within 6 hexes, there's sort of a chance of activating the Union units. I don't have a good way of marking that. So the game came with these counters, activation counters, which indicate that a specific regiment is going to be active. It gets an activation chance from then on. But there's no real, hey, we're active or we're not. So I'm thinking I'm going to rotate all the Union leaders to indicate that they're sleeping. Or something. Another interesting thing on these, they upgraded the leaders, put a little cross on them. That's useful to let you know, hey, this is a replacement leader, not the original that's up here. Union battery activation markers. Okay. Brigades are released due to closeness, but there are also other factors. I don't want to go into all that. Victory points, largely the same as they are in all the others. This big list of casualties, it seems like there's extra bonuses for brigade combat effectiveness failure. I don't know if that's well spelled out in the game. I don't like reading too much. Yeah, it is. I'm not sure it was in the other one. We're looking at a 0 as the breaking point on here, 0 to 1. But there is terrain. And guess what? I got no idea where it is. Seriously, I don't know what's worthwhile. This here is worth 10, I believe, to the Confederates and 30 to the Union. There's probably others elsewhere. Oh, there's one, 2020. 2020. There's no list in the game, 3010. There is no list in the rulebook of what victory point hexes are worthwhile. And I don't think there's one on the map. I think you have to hunt them down in order to find them. And that kind of sucks. I guess that's about it. It's hard to tell because the rules are kind of in pieces. Alright, not exactly an introduction to it. If you wanted the introduction, well, most of it's back in Stonewall, which is the first game of this series, more or less, that I handled. But Wilson's Creek covered the differences between this second incarnation and incarnations 1 and 1.5. And there's another one that I don't even know what it's like. I don't remember if it's Shiloh. I think so. That came out between between TSS, Stonewall, and this series. And I don't know if that's more along the lines of TSS, Stonewall, which makes some significant differences, or if it's kind of drifting towards these, which is sort of a step away from further down the line from Stonewall. All right, up it goes.